This is a lecture on sidechaining and will focus specifically on the use of sidechain compression and sidechain gating in Pro Tools. There are three aims of this lecture. Number one, to explain the theory of sidechaining. Number two, to demonstrate how it's done in Pro Tools. And number three, to demonstrate musical production techniques that use sidechaining. Sidechaining allows the signal from one part to control the dynamics of another. When used with compression, it will temporarily turn down the volume of one part in order to allow another part to be heard. When used with gating, it will raise the volume of a part in time with another part, thereby synchronizing the two parts. Okay, so let's start with sidechain compression. So the main function of a compressor is to automatically turn down the volume of a signal when it gets too loud. Compressors work by splitting an incoming signal and sending it to two distinct components, a detector and an attenuator. The role of the detector is to listen to the signal and determine when its volume has passed a set threshold. And so that is what the threshold setting on a compressor does. It tells the detector at what point the signal has become too loud. When the threshold is reached, the detector sends a trigger to the attenuator, telling it to turn down the volume of the signal. How much the attenuator turns down the signal is determined by the ratio. How quickly the attenuator turns down the volume is determined by the attack, and the release determines how quickly the attenuator brings the volume back up to zero once the volume going to the detector has gone back below the threshold. Sidechaining is when different signals are sent to the detector and the attenuator. It results in the volume of one signal being controlled by the volume of another. One common use of sidechaining is a technique known as ducking, which is widely used in broadcasting. So in this scenario here, we have two signals, the DJ's microphone and the music being played. The signal from the DJ's microphone is going straight to the output that's being broadcast. However, the music being played is being sent to the attenuator of a compressor. As you can see, the detector of this compressor is receiving its input from the DJ's microphone. This means that when the DJ is silent, the attenuator is inactive and the music playing will go to the output. However, when the DJ speaks, the detector is then activated and this triggers the attenuator to turn down the music. The benefit of this process is obviously that it's automatic and therefore the DJ doesn't need to remember to turn down the music before speaking. Ducking is also used when mixing a bass instrument with a kick drum. As we've covered before, when mixing, it's important to make sure that each instrument has its own space in the mix. This can occur in terms of panning, in which case we use left and right, or it can occur in terms of frequency, in which case we use EQ to place things in either the high, middle or low frequencies. However, in the case of trying to mix a bass instrument with a kick drum, a problem often occurs. In the case of moving them left and right, low frequency sounds work best in the center of a mix, and therefore panning isn't an option. The next option would then be using EQ to move them out of each other's way. However, sometimes this isn't an option, especially if the low frequency of the kick drum is also an important frequency in the bass line. One solution to this problem then is using ducking, that is, using the signal from the kick drum to briefly turn down the volume of the bass guitar. So here I've got an 8-bar pattern which consists of a simple drum beat and a bass guitar playing a fairly simple idea on just one note. And here it is with just the kick and the bass guitar. Now listening to that, I do feel like the attack of the kick drum is getting a little bit buried behind the bass guitar. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some sidechain compression to the bass guitar so that its volume gets ducked by the kick drum. So I'll start by adding a compressor insert onto the bass guitar. So if I start playing the bass now, you can see that the compressor's doing something, and this is just straightforward compression on the bass itself. So the bass signal is going to the detector and then that's triggering the attenuator to turn down the bass guitar. But for this demonstration, I want my compressor to be sidechained to the kick drum. And this is where you'll find the sidechain section on the Pro Tools compressor. So I'm going to start playing again, and then when I activate the sidechain by pressing the key button here, the compressor stops, and that's because we haven't yet sent any signal into the sidechain. In order to send a signal to the sidechain, I need to go to this section here that says Key Input. And I'm going to select a bus. And then I'm going to send a signal to that bus on one of the auxiliary sends on the kick drum. So here's my send. I'm going to set it as pre, so that the signal to the sidechain will go even if I mute the kick drum channel. And now I'm going to turn up my fader. And there you can see the signal from the kick drum is starting to make the attenuator respond, and we're getting some gain reduction in time with the kick drum. So at the moment we're not actually getting much compression, and that's because the settings on my compressor are fairly low, especially the ratio. So what I'll do now is I'll play the loop again, but this time I'm going to start turning up the settings on the compressor, and you should hear the sidechain working a lot more. Now you can probably hear that my attack time is too slow. At the moment it's 10 milliseconds, which is too slow to respond to the transient of a kick drum. So I'll speed up the attack and you should start to hear it respond more quickly. I'll slow down the release as well, because then you'll be able to hear the sidechain really working. So by now you should be able to really hear the sidechain in effect, because it's quite high setting. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring the kick back in, and then I'm going to adjust the attack and release time until the sidechain is long enough to let the kick through, but not so long that it messes up the sound of the bass. So again, if I slow down my attack, you'll start to hear that the sidechain is working far too slowly to be effective. And now I'll speed it back up again, so it's working quickly enough. And now I'll set my release long enough so that the full sound of the kick can come through. And what I'm looking for here is that the movement on the gain reduction on the compressor and the movement on the channel meter should be pretty much the same. And now you should be able to hear the difference if I drop the compressor in and out. kept it fairly subtle, but it does just give the kick drum a little bit more clarity. And now I'll bring in the rest of the kit. Okay, so here's another example of sidechain compression in production, and this time I'm going to sidechain a reverb that's on a vocal. So here I've got 3 tracks. I've got a piano accompaniment, I've got a solo vocal, and then I've got a reverb that's going to be put on the vocal. So here's a quick section of it without the reverb.
'Cause I've been strong for so long that I never thought how much I needed you. But I think I'm lost without you.
So what you can hear there is a vocal part that was recorded in a vocal booth, so completely dry, no reverb. But for this kind of style, you do need reverb on the voice just to give it a sense of epicness and grandeur. So there's my reverb. I've gone for a church setting, so it's going to have quite a high density. It's also got quite a long decay, 5.5 seconds. So overall it's going to be quite a big reverb, but that's what I want. I want a really kind of big, epic sounding reverb. So let's have a listen to that reverb just with the vocal.
Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past.
So obviously that's a pretty big reverb sound, and the vocals are getting somewhat lost in it and losing some of their clarity. Let's try it again, but this time I'll bring the volume of the reverb down a bit.
Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home.
So the clarity of the vocals is better, but now I feel like the reverb isn't filling the space in the gaps between the vocals. One option for this is sidechain compression. So you can see here on the track, I've got a compressor after my reverb, and I've set up the sidechain to receive an input through bus 3. So now I'll send the vocal into that bus so that we get the dry signal going into the sidechain. So now when the vocalist sings, the compressor will turn down the reverb, but then when the vocalist stops, the reverb can then come back up in volume and fill the spaces in between. And so what we're getting here is a kind of automated wet-dry balance, which automatically brings the reverb volume up and down. So I'm going to start off with my compressor settings all the way down, so ratio at 1:1 and my threshold up at 0. And then I'll gradually turn the compression amount up until you can hear the sidechain compressor working.
Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home.
So those settings are pretty high, you should be able to really hear the compressor working. So I'm going to lighten the settings a bit now. I'll lower the ratio but in particular I'm going to slow down the release time, and that's because I don't want the reverb to come back up so obviously. I'm going to make it more of a slower release so it comes up more naturally.
Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home.
So by now it's pretty subtle. We're only getting about 5 or 6 dB of gain reduction, but if I bypass it, you should be able to hear the difference.
Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home.
And now I'll just bring the piano back in so we can hear it in the context of the whole mix.
Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home. Strangers are rushing past, just trying to get home.
So that's sidechain compression, but we can also do sidechaining with a gate. So a gate is effectively the opposite of a compressor. It attenuates any part of a signal which is below the threshold. So if we think again in terms of our detector and attenuator, once the signal going to the detector goes above the threshold, a signal is then sent to the attenuator, which then opens the gate and allows the signal to be heard. Sidechain gating sends an external signal to the detector that tells the gate to open and allows another signal to be heard. It's an effective way of synchronizing the onset of one sound with another. So here's an example of sidechain gating, and in this example I'm going to sidechain a sine wave with a kick drum. This is from a session I did with a drummer who had quite a small, quite a high-tuned kick drum. This drummer was normally a jazz drummer, and jazz drummers tend to use more kind of smaller, higher-pitched kick drums. However, that wasn't what I wanted when I came to do the final mix. I wanted something that was deeper and more full in sound. Now, obviously, one way around this would be sample replacement, so I could take a really kind of deep and full kick drum sound and synchronize it with the performance that's already there. However, there is another technique that I like to use where I take a low-tuned sine wave and I use a gate in order to synchronize its sound with a kick drum. And I find that this gives me that kind of low resonance that you would get from a very deep kick drum. So you can see here I've created an auxiliary channel next to my kick drums, and on it I have added a signal generator insert, and I've tuned it to 60 Hz. And if I solo that track and then bypass my gate, you can hear that what that's generating is just a continuous sine wave of 60 Hz. So if I bring back my gate plugin, you can see that the sidechain is active and it's being fed from bus 5. And as you can see here, the signal to bus 5 is coming from the second kick drum. And so if I solo the second kick drum and press play, you should be able to see that the gate will begin to open in time with it. And then if I just play the sine wave by itself, you can hear that it is synchronized to the kick. Okay, so what I'll do now is I will mute the sine wave, and then I'll play all of the other drum tracks and I'll drop the sine wave in so that you can hear the difference. Okay, so that's a very quick and easy way to fatten up a kick drum, and it can work for other drums as well, so you can add it to the low end of a tom if you want to kind of get extra resonance from it. Another example of sidechain gating on drums is a gated reverb on a snare drum. So here we have a snare drum that's pretty dry. So what I think I'll do is I will add some reverb to that snare drum. So I'll create a new track and I'll make it a stereo auxiliary. And then I am going to add a reverb plugin to it. I'm also going to add some compression to it because I want to make my reverb sound really big. And I'll even add some EQ to it to really make it stand out. So now I'm going to add a gate after the reverb and the compression and the EQ. And I'm going to sidechain the gate using the signal coming from the dry snare drum. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set the attack and release times on the gate so that the timing of the gate matches roughly the dry snare. So that's how long the reverb is without the gate. And there it is with the gate again. So now I'll play the whole beat, but without the timed reverb. And here it is with the reverb. And now if I bypass the gate, and so there it is, a kind of classic 80s style gated reverb. And so there it is, sidechaining in Pro Tools using either a gate or a compressor. And I'll put the Pro Tools sessions that I've used in this video up on Vital so you can download them and practice it for yourself.